Hi, my name is Stephanie Reynolds, and I'm going to present to you my final research paper. Again, my name is Stephanie Reynolds. I'm a third grade teacher at Sergeant Bluff Luton Elementary School. Sergeant Bluff Luton has 4 different buildings. We have our preschool through second grade building, our primary building, third grade through fifth grade building, which I am in, and our sixth through eighth, which is our middle school, and our high school, which is 9 through 12. I teach reading and math only in the third grade, which is different than some schools, as we are only teaching, each teacher in the third grade only teaches 2 subjects. There are 5 teachers in third grade with 1 special education teacher directly just for the third grade students. The title of my research is Social Emotional Learning, developing those social emotional learning skills among third grade students through Class Dojo to enhance reading and math performance. Over the past decade, there have been many changes in the educational learning environment, including but not limited to elementary classrooms. A recurrent problem in my classroom is the social emotional learning skills throughout the past years that I've been teaching. I want to be able to help my students not only grow socially, to learn, not only learn, but grow socially and emotionally as well. All students have many different social and emotional needs. No, not 2 students are the same. Schools need to teach students how to cope with their different needs. Students do not have control over their emotions. Therefore, they're not staying regular. They don't have those skills that they need to cope, to survive and make it through the day. If they're not regular, they're not learning. The purpose of this study was to explore the implementation of social emotional learning strategies in the third grade classroom to enhance students' math and reading scores. After reviewing the literature, the researcher found that there are extensive concerns regarding social and emotional instability in the elementary classroom across the United States. The researcher decided to incorporate more social emotional learning opportunities into the classroom through classroom building and class dojo. Students were regulated and able to control their emotions. There were 46% of elementary students are becoming disengaged in the school setting, creating a learning gap in the classroom, according to Aubrey. Students are not able to close this gap unless they are self-regulated. I had 3 research questions from this study. Those 3 research questions are: what social emotional learning close the achievement gaps? Will that learning close the gaps? The second one, will more social emotional learning help keep all students in the classroom regulated? How does social emotional learning regulation affect all students learning in the classroom? A mixed review case study design served as the methodological approach for this research. Mixed review case studies involve investigating both quantitative and qualitative data, which is the procedure being used for this research. A case study design was chosen due to the in-depth investigation of one specific classroom of students and the age of the participants. The age of the participants, there were 21 8 to 9 year-old students from a third grade classroom in a rural Iowa school district. 40% of the class were females and 60% of the class were males. 95% were Caucasian and 5% were Asian. 25% of the classroom was made up with IEPs and 50% of the classroom were on check and check out, which is the part of the PBIS system, positive behavior intervention services. Observations in this study were persistent and direct. The researcher completed all the data, which was me. I completed all of the data that there was. I completed an intervention of implementing social emotional learning skills over a 4-week period. The data was looked at by my instructional coach in the school district, and I sat down with my instructional coach to discuss the findings before implementing them into the classroom. The researcher used 3 different types of data to collect for this intervention, for this research study. The first one was academic performance tests. The purpose of using the academic performance test was to gather a baseline to see where students were at academically in math, reading, and SABERS. SABERS is the social emotional learning tool that is used in the state of Iowa. The researcher used the academic test to help answer the first research question: what is the effect of social emotional learning strategies on students' academic grades? Data from the academic performance test were analyzed and recorded. I noted that during this test, the students were seated quietly. Two of the students during the test asked for help, where I could unfortunately not help them during these tests. 5 students did not use any scratch paper on the math portion of the test, and many questions on that test do require that. During the reading portion of the test, students had to read the test and answer the questions themselves. I walked around and monitored while doing this test, but didn't want to walk around too much to hinder any sort of having kids get anxious or anything like that. The academic performance tests were done at the beginning of the 4-week period, and then they were also done at the end of the 4-week period. The second data collection that I used was a reflective journal. The purpose of this data collection in this study was to investigate the question: what time of day are students exhibiting difficulty during using their social emotional learning skills? The daily reflections in the journal will detail data collections with the researchers' thoughts and feelings in a visible manner concerning the student's social and emotional competency in relationship to the time of the day. So there were 3 times of the day. There was the morning from 8:15 to 10:15. There was the mid-morning from 10:15 to 12:15, and then there was the afternoon from 12:15 to 3:15. I'm sorry. After collecting all of the data, I reread the journal reflections and looked for any evidence or any specific patterns in the time of the day that the social and/or emotional skills were challenged most. I highlighted that time in those reflections with 3 different colors, and I highlighted the times that were from the 3 different times in 3 different colors. So morning was in pink, mid-morning was in gray, and the afternoon one was in yellow. When I was collecting the data, I had a chart, and I would use tally marks to use that data. The third piece of data collection that I used was a behavioral checklist. The purpose of this data collection was to answer my third research question: what behaviors are observed to be the most difficult to regulate? I was trying to determine what type of behavior was the most difficult for students to regulate. I used a checklist which had disrespect to adult, disrespect to peers, does not persevere, off task, does not show empathy, doesn't notice others' emotions, doesn't accept consequences. I used a checklist, and I had on the right-hand column of my checklist, there were tally marks that every time that somebody in my classroom would do that, I would just put a tally mark by that. When it was all done, there were 3 different themes that I coded and found 3 different themes, and that were for the specific social emotional categories to see if there was one category that was harder to find than the others, or harder for them to regulate than the others. There were growth mindset, relationship skills, and self-awareness skills. So research question 1 was: what is the effect of social emotional learning strategies on students' academic scores? In this figure here, this graph that you can see illustrates the academic test scores in reading and math and the social emotional test scores at the beginning of the data collection period. It shows how many students were below level, on level, and above level in the areas of reading, math, and that social emotional learning. For implementing any sort of social emotional learning skills and strategies for the students to use, there were 12 students on level, 12 students in reading and in math, and in the Sabres area, there were 9 students on level. As you can see, there were 3 students that were below level in reading, 6 students in math, and 5 students in the area of Sabres. This next chart here shows how many students after I implemented the intervention in the classroom. This next graph here shows how many students were below level, on level, and above level. There were 4 students below level in reading, 5 students below level in math, and 3 below level in the Sabres. 11 on level in reading, 13 on level in math, and in Sabres there were 9 on level as well. After implementing this data, it shows that there were not necessarily there were not necessarily a trend of what we could see here. The second research question and was using the behavioral checklist, and this showed that there were, sorry, I used a reflective journal on this one on research question 2, behavioral checklist. This showed that there were, in the morning and in the mid-morning, there were about the same level of students having the negative social emotional skills being seen, but in the afternoon was the big one. 58 is what we saw in the afternoon. Kids coming back from lunch and recess, they had a hard time if something happened at recess, controlling those emotions in the classroom. And the third research question was, what behaviors are most observed to be difficult to regulate? The most was disrespect to peers, and the disrespect to adults, does not persevere, off task. Those were kind of all in the same area. It doesn't notice others' emotions. You coded those to see if there was one area that was harder than the others. Students' relationship skills definitely is something that was higher need for the negative. They need that more. That is one thing that we saw more. I saw more when I was doing this. In order for students to perform at a higher level and achieve, they need to be socially and emotionally stable. I use the morning's meetings to build relationships in the classroom to help promote a positive learning environment. Over the past decade, there have been many changes in the educational learning environment, including but not limited to elementary classrooms. In order for students to perform at a high level and achieve, they need to be socially and emotionally stable. It's important to acknowledge and understand social and emotional variables in the classroom. Having a social and emotional learning program in the classroom helps to promote positivity in a calm environment. Social and emotional learning is essential for substantial academic achievements. The use of morning meetings to build relationships in the classroom is important for students. Davis 2014 was the research that I found that also supported my findings in the classroom. Through examination of the positive psychology theory, my third research, the study was guided. The positive psychology theory is guided by Martin Seligman. He has 5 factors in there that he believes help students to succeed in the classroom. If you have all 5 of those factors, positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and purpose, you will succeed and accomplish. This will lead you to happiness in life. If you're happy, you're succeeding in the classroom. If you're happy, you're having, there's a meaningful purpose for you. You are trying your best. You're doing the best that you can. It would be a huge benefit after doing this research for teachers to be trained on different social emotional learning strategies to implement into the classroom. It's a huge need. Social emotional learning increases student academics performance and helps them adapt to society by increasing their lifelong learning skills. According to Miyamoto, one possible reason behind the gaps in social and emotional learning is the reality. It is hard to see improvement when you teach those skills. Going with that, some limitations from this study was that it was not long enough. It's hard to see those skills being taught and used in a 4-week period. It was also only from one small class in Northwest Iowa. There were students in this specific class that have individualized educational plans due to their extreme behaviors, which can throw off some of the data and results. Finding the data for students who already are having social emotional instability issues. Find that data, and so that way you have a baseline there. Here are my references. Thank you.